Right, so this is Fix It Friday for the 20th of May. So a couple of points to cover. So the first one, and this gets asked quite a lot, so probably a good idea to go over this. Right, so the plugin. Right, so let's go to our web browser of choice and download the plugin. So I can't remember where it is off the top of my head, so I have to use my own website. Studio Toolkit. Right, so if you go to Casbit's IMVU Studio Toolkit, get the page, and I've put some links in. What's needed? IMVU Studio Toolkit. So just click on that, and it'll take you to IMVU's Studio Toolkit website. So scroll down the page until you get to this section. You want to download, so click on the link, download, and it has been updated, so download the latest version. It should always have the latest version. It'll download the zip file. Show in folder. Right, so this is the folder. That's the zip file. So for this, do not, so normally people just double click on it and extract it or look at the contents. We don't need to do this. So big green X, don't do this. All you need to do is open Blender, go into Preferences, Edit, Preferences. That'll open up this little pop-up, and click on the Add-ons tab. So it's already selected because it was previously selected. And then click on the Install button. So click on that. It'll open the file browser, so you now have to browse to wherever the file is. So Downloads, and you've got to find it in here somewhere. So let's change to List. And there is the toolkit that was just downloaded, so that's a zip file. So click on that. So again, we do not extract this, we leave it in its form, zip. Select, install add-on, and Blender will install it, and it'll give us this message at the bottom. So we should find, if we then type IMVU, it'll show us the entry for the toolkit. 0.63. So that's the latest version. And that is the toolkit installed. We don't need to unpack or do anything else, just load the zip file directly from install. And you do that if you are installing it for the first time or updating a previous install. It'll just override the default. It'll override whatever was put there before.
The screen is a bit blurry.
Is it?
Yeah. Okay, it's fine now.
Yeah, it's probably just a connection thing. I've dropped it down to 720p, so it was at 1080, but I've dropped it down, so that should be okay. But that is installing and or updating the plugin. So create.imvu.com/articles/studio/toolkit. Then scroll down to the green area and just click on the link. And then again, install the zip file directly. Do not unpack it. So that was the first issue. The second one, and let's close that, Oh, and also we want to be using, I just used Blender 3.1 to update the old version, but what we want to be using is 2.93 LTS for the toolkit unless IMVU say otherwise, because the LTS version is a long-term support. So I've already got this updated, I think. Preferences, IMVU, whoops. Yeah, it's already updated to the latest version. So, second issue, we had problems previously this version won't work, but we had problems. I'll open the latest version. Don't save. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. Yeah, you weren't supposed to see that. That's a secret, super secret project. So previously we had a problem if we were creating animations where the avatar rotates using the root node. So let me just do a loop on this. So in the previous versions this wouldn't work. It did some really weird thing when it was in IMVU when we imported the files, but they fixed it now so that we can, not only can we move the avatar using the root excuse me, the root node or the root bone, so we can do all sorts of animations that require the avatar to be moved rather than it just being static on the spot all the time. We can now move it off the grid center, so we can do all sorts of other things now. But previously there was a problem with the rotation of the avatar using the root. So you could move it, you could move the root, but you couldn't rotate it. But now, with the latest version, they fixed it so that, let's hope this doesn't crash. So now it'll move and rotate the avatar. This was just a simple test animation. But if I decorate the room, which one's that one? Nope. 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 It's that one. Orientation widget. Why is that upside down? No, I don't want to move it. What do I want to do? Oh, there we go. Right, so just dropping that in place so that we can actually see the avatar moving in relation to it. Whoops. So we can now export sequences, animations, where the avatar is moving from the origin point and rotating and doing whatever animation we want it to do. So they fixed that, but you'll need the latest plugin for that, which is 0.6.3 at time of doing this. So that's issue number 2. So number 3, let's close that. Don't save. So number 3 is I have to open 3.1 for this. Let's close that. Or do I? Hang on whilst I find the file. Right. So, whoops. Reload that. So here's a tip. If you're working on this is one of our group members' files, but the problem that they were having is going to be an interesting one for people to be aware of. But quick tip, when you're opening somebody else's file and you're not sure about what version they've used or how they've organized their layout, what you can do is disable load UI. So click on this little properties cog, get this little panel open, disable that, and then load the file. So select, open and load. It'll reset, so you'll have to do some jiggery pokery to get the scale back up depending on what file you've used, if it's a starter file or IMVU's starter kit. This sets the camera clip distance. Right, so the problem that some pseudonym was having was that they'd made a custom body shape, which is this, but they were having problems aligning the UV map. So what they were doing was basically using the default skin. So as it's a custom body type, there was, I mean, as with most avatar types, this, you know, you want to keep the skin. So that means that you have to map your mesh to the skin. So this shoulder area is this section and this section. So that goes in there and that goes in there. But when you increase the resolution of your mesh, so this is theirs, so let's just do a little bit of wireframe. So this is their mesh, and it's basically just doubled the resolution of the default avatar. But if we compare that to the default, let's change the material to make that easier to see. So we can see that the defaults are pretty low resolution, but the UV mapping is obviously mapped to match this structure. So when you start subdividing and adding more mesh structure, whoops, you're also adding structure to the UV map, because obviously you're increasing the map to match the new mesh. But when you do that, you often inadvertently cause a mismatch. Let me just you often cause a slight mismatch where the seams are. So there's a seam running up this part of the arm, and there's a mismatch between these faces and the UV vertices. And whenever that happens, you end up with a line appearing on your mesh, because you've got a disparity between the textures, well, the texture alignment for those two halves of the UV. So basically what you're trying to do is match up the UV, and that's tricky to do. So let's rotate this around the back. Enable that. So we've got will it do it? Where are we? So that's the back. Oh, there we go. So we can see with there's a feature at the top here. It's not. It's because we're actually in manipulation mode. So if you have this enabled, it selects connected vertices so that you can see what's being manipulated. So those two correspond to that vertex, and we can see how they're aligned. But because there's a disparity between the two, we end up with the aforementioned dark line at the UV seam, because we've got the dark area of that texture there and a dark area there, but they're not matched up correctly. So the way to, it's not so much solve, but the way to help yourself when you're working with this, or when you're trying to fix this problem, is to load up the default, which is the avatar that you're trying, the UV map that you're trying to match. So it doesn't matter what your high res is like. Doesn't really matter if you're going to use the skin. Your high res has to match or correspond to the low res as much as possible. So the way to solve this, or to assist in fixing the problem, load up the low res, make sure you can see the UV map, then export it. So UV, export UV layout. So UV, export UV layout. What you want to do here is export it as large as you can. So let's go 2048 by 4096. Fill opacity 1 because we want a complete wireframe. UV map. Then export. And then open that in your, just to double check. Open that in your editor. IMVU third party. Because we just want to double check. So that's the UV. We'll go full size. So that's full size. And the reason you want to be as big as you can get it is because you want the UV lines, the edges, the UV edges, to be as clear as possible relative to the, you know, when pixels are describing lines that are not perpendicular, you get this stepping, which can make aligning UV vertices and edges quite tricky. But you want to try and get your image as large as you can get it so that you don't see too much pixelation or anti-aliasing. But what you then do is once you've got your image, we want our high res. It uses the same material, but so that's our high res. That's the UV map for the high res. Shading. What we want to do here is replace the skin texture with the UV map. So all we need to do is just click on the file button. Oh, that might want us to unpack. Use say it's okay. So we've unpacked the file because that was packed with the file. So click on the file icon. Find the file, the export. There it is. Just to double check. Open. So we've got the UV map mapped to our high-res mesh. So now we can see, looking at this, there's a disconnect between these two UV sections. So what we can do now, load up. Where's our image? Oh, there it is. Load up the UV. We've got our UV map visible. So that's our high res. And all we need to do is either find the corresponding. Is it on this side? Yeah, so it's on this side. So we're looking at the corresponding UV. And what we have to do, just disconnect that, is shift the UV around a little bit to align. So it's this UV that should have been aligned here. But because of the way that the mesh was subdivided, so we can see this edge loop should really follow this UV edge loop, but it's out of whack a little bit just because of the fact that the mesh has been subdivided. So once we've got that in place, all we need to do, so we now have our UV aligned, so I might have to straighten up the UV a little bit. So we've got the same problem at the bottom. So this is the UV that corresponds to, I think it'll be this vertex. But that's the one that should be. So we can see how the UV is realigning itself. So we might have to straighten up the UV a little bit. But that is how you can help yourself in solving that problem. So you export the low-res UV, so the low-res mesh UV as high-res as you can possibly get it. So let's see which is, so that's that UV at the top there, so that's that UV here. So when you make your custom avatars, you don't necessarily want to be just using the subdivision modifier, but you can see now, so that's the fixed shoulder, so those two have been fixed, whereas compared to the other side it's still got the error or the disconnect between those two UVs. But that's how you can fix that problem, or make it easier to fix it, by exporting the high res or the low res to the high res mesh, so that you can then appropriately adjust your UVs. So there's a little trick for you. But when you make your custom avatars, so there we go, that's fix that ish. What's that one? So that's that one. Yes, so that's fixed that. But it also allows you to then adjust the UVs generally so that you're getting a better alignment with the underlying texture that you want to utilize, because you want to keep the, any skin mesh. You're creating your avatar to be any skin. So if you don't do this, you're going to get problems, and it's more noticeable on some skin tones than it is on the others. But that is how you can sort out that problem, by exporting the UV map from the low res mesh and using that as a template or guide to match your high res to. So that's the 3 topics that wanted to cover. So are there any questions?
No, not really. You did a great job.
General. Well, it's one of those, this in particular is one of those really tricky issues to sort out because of the way that subdivision tends to distort the UVs.
Looks like a lot of work.
It is. It is. You know, trying to match all of these up.
Is that a body shape? Like,
Yes, some pseudonym was creating a new body type, but he was having problems getting the UVs to match up. So, sorry?
no, I said there was a glitch.
Yes. But that's how you can solve that problem, is by using the low res, because that's what you're trying to match, because you want the skin.
Yeah.
So we should find now, if we switch back to the skin, there's still a teeny tiny, I don't know how clearly that will come up on screen, but there's still a teeny tiny, but compared to the other side, that wasn't fixed. So we didn't fix this, but we did fix this. So there's a little tiny edge there. So it's just a question of going back into the UV map and making adjustments to the placement of the UV on the custom mesh and getting rid of those edges. But it's barely noticeable. But on the other side it is. But that's basically how you make your custom meshes. If you want to use a default body,
Nice.
custom body type I should say, if you want to make a custom body type.
There's something new.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's basically glorified clothing because it uses the same principles as clothing. So as long as you have your mesh set up and parented to the skeleton, and it articulates the way that you expect it to, or it'll export and you can override the defaults. So yeah, that's that problem solved. Let me just save this actually. So save as. So yes, whenever exporting using the toolkit now, make sure you're using the export button. This one's just for you, Big. So it doesn't matter what you're making. Furniture, an attachment, clothing, animation. As soon as you save the file, so let's just add a key. Save as. We've got art for our single pose, and then you just click the export button. So that's all we need for the toolkit. Just use everything. Everything is self-contained within the toolkit now for basic production.
It was definitely me yesterday.
Yeah. Let's do Use the tool.
So for the single poses, right? You don't need an auto key.
You don't need a what, sorry?
The auto key doesn't need to be on, right?
Oh, well, the auto key is just a production aid. You don't need it to be on, but basically what it does is that if it is on, whenever you, so if I, as you might have noticed, so I've moved a couple of bones, but nothing's happened in the timeline apart from that initial set of keyframes that were locked into there, dropped into there, because I clicked the add key button. So if I select these, the two hand controllers, and then click the add key button, that'll drop in two keyframes. So that's manually, but if I have auto key enabled and just move one of these bones, one of these controllers, and release after I've moved it, it automatically drops in the controller for the corresponding bone.
Oh, so it just does it.
So it does it automatically. It's just a, it's basically a time saver.
Oh, okay.
So you don't, so otherwise what you would have to do is, right, so I've moved that, so now I have to insert the keyframe. Move that, so I now have to insert the keyframe. So it just saves you from doing that. So if it's auto enabled, if auto insert is enabled,
Yeah.
it'll drop in the keyframes for us. So it's dropping in as we move the bones, the corresponding bones, it's dropping the keyframes in.
Makes sense.
So let's do push. But we do have to be careful because of the structure, the way that the avatars have been constructed. We do have to be careful that we don't collapse the mesh too. So there we go, there's a push. Let's rotate the fingers. We're going to change from global to local. This reorientates the so this is a bit tricky to figure out which one is which. Flatten out the hand. So there we go, pushing against a secret door, an invisible door, a mime. Let's save this, save as, fix it Friday, push. So we've got our make pose option set, and we've got export all bones set. So all we need to do is click the export button. So it's done its thing. So let's get this into Studio. Studio. Credit your product. Just derived from empty mood 10,945,930, just because it's easier. Derive. There's the avatar. Import our FBX. Find the file. What did we call it? Fix it Friday. Oh, there it is. Fix it Friday. Open. Set up FBX. That's okay. Next. That's all right. No materials. There's our animation. We could have called it something, renamed it. If we were going to import a load of animations, we want to rename these. So review, import, brought it in. Failing that, we can, so actions, failing that, we can also rename it in. So let's click on the ellipsis, open in folder, compress data, there's our XAF. Whoops. Just needed to know. We'll call this push, close that, and it should automatically update, and it has, or has it? Should do. Action, avatar, stars.idle, ensemble. There is our sequence. It hasn't updated it properly yet, but 1, 2, place, apply, preview. Oops, we forgot to do figure 0, preview. There is our pose. So it's pretty quick. The toolkit makes it much easier, much quicker to get our poses into IMVU. Hey Kirsty. So that's pretty much it, unless there's any questions.
No questions.
Your Honor. I didn't do nothing. Yeah, it's kind of tricky getting the timing right for when doing streams or anything, because obviously most of the folks that use IMVU are based in the US, and of course, you know, that basically means that in order to catch people in the US, over here it means starting much later.
Yep.
You'd have a much better chance of catching people.
That's
But yeah, right. Well, I'll stop recording. Stop.